Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now, first thing you'll see, of course, is that the Panzerabwehrkanone that I've got in front of me here is not spinning around, and it's because the thing is enormous. This is one of the new plastic kits from Warlord Games, and if I whiz it around a little bit here, let's get a shot from the other side too. A really fantastic kit, loads of fun to paint, and I'm really happy with the result. I'm going to do a short review, quick look at the sprues for both this and the heavy weapons team at the start. And yeah, just really happy with that result, and it's super simple to do as well. So moving along nice and quick, because there is quite a lot to do here, let's get started. So right up top, me being a clever clogs, I have gone ahead and assembled the anti-tank gun without having the good sense to put it under the camera for you folks. Now, there are still photos of the sprues and what have you available on the Warlord website, but I mention that still because of the fact that it was so easy to put together. Warlord tends not to include instructions for these sort of pre-release preview things, and I didn't need them. With just one glance, I think, at the product page to get a look at where one of the bits sort of behind the gun was, I was able to assemble the whole thing just by sight. So really easy to assemble. Certainly beats fighting the metal ones, I'll be honest. I do like the metal guns. I found that they are a little bit more detailed compared to the plastic one, the Pak 40 that's just come along. But as an upshot to that, they weigh a metric ton, and you've then got to assemble them, super glue, all that sort of carry on. So the plastic, from a gaming perspective, I would suggest is going to be an improvement. Now, I've got these guys in front of me here because I think the crew frames, these are the stars of the show. These are the same in both the anti-tank gun and the heavy weapons platoon box. And the idea is that they are a generic set of figures that you can use for pretty much any heavy weapon. Now, that's a cool idea. I really like it. And in practice, you'll see that the gun crew that I was able to assemble from these, it works quite well. They've got ammo bearers. There's a fellow who is acting as an officer for the group and what have you. And the fact that the uniform is relatively simple, they've kept them in anklets. So this is starting to get into sort of 43 onwards. It is a late war box, but you can still go ahead and use them as Afrika Korps as well, because particularly towards the end of the Desert War and into Tunisia, the anklets were starting to make an appearance, and otherwise the equipment and the tunics were more or less the same cut. Certainly for us putting them on the table, it will not matter. You can just paint them up how you like. So this heavy weapons team here, I did go ahead and I've popped Afrika Korps heads on them. I had some of them spare, and the rest is all just straight from the heavy weapons team set. So you're not going to find it too difficult to find a place for these guys in your army, I would suggest. Even the Stalingrad veterans boxes and what have you, they're going to benefit from these kits. So as well as making pretty decent artillery crew, they also work for the guns, the mortars and what have you. And the idea with those is that there is a huge, this is just a great set of bits. There's MG34 and 42, both on the frame. And something I really like that I didn't notice at first is that there's tripods that are both in the sort of typical firing position. They're raised up a little. And there's also one which is standing all the way up for flak position, which I don't think I've ever seen in a wargaming miniature before. That's quite neat. Ammo boxes, spares, that sort of stuff is plenty. So whether you're making mortars, MG teams, and the Panzerschrecks, very cool. Not entirely relevant to the anti-tank gun we're painting today, but worth a quick glance anyway, because this, I think, and you'll hear me say this again later on, this is going to change how people play bolt action. I know a lot of folks turn their nose up at having to assemble metal weapons teams. This, yeah, German armies are going to change shape real quick. Okie dokie. So really quickly up top, because it is important, what I'm holding here is the assembled Pak 40 and crew on a big MDF base. Now these are not what you're going to get in the plastic box. The reason being, what you'll find is what you do see on the box itself, which is two guys and a gun, which are assembled on a big 60mm base, and then 2 fellas who are normally free-floating on other smaller bases. Now, Warlord, they did send me the kit, but they didn't send me any bases, so I kind of had to improvise. And personally, I do prefer the larger MDF bases, and I just happen to have one laying around, which is why I've assembled them on this. Now, downside to this, because I am a fool, I got really excited and I glued everything down. This would be easier if I had posed my crew, like glued the gun down to the base, posed the crew, and then popped them up individually on like a bit of cork, or maybe drill into their foot with some wire or something to hold on to them. Paint those separately. But as always, if I've rushed it, I can still show you how to do it if you do the same as I do and get a little bit too keen and rush ahead like this. So however you do end up assembling them, either on a bigger base or individually, the first thing to do, of course, is to prime them. And here what I've primed them with is the premium grey from Vallejo. It's out of a rattle can. A grey, because I've got the crew on the bases, is going to be much easier. If you are priming them separately, then you may want to paint the gun in a sand, like a desert sand, or even a bony color. It's not going to make a huge difference to the overall finish, what I've done here, but just to be aware, obviously, you have more options if you're not a clown like me. So to start off with, we're going to begin by basing the gun itself. Now for this one I'm going to use is Camo Sand from the Army Painter. And this is one from the German historical paint set that they do. It is very close to Vallejo's, what is it, green ochre. Just a tiny touch less green in finish. The idea here is that this is actually quite a good Dunkelgelb. So as well as for like Afrika Korps helmets and tin equipment, for your late war German stuff, this will work just fine as a base for that yellowish gear. Now obviously you can see some of this is still showing through the primer. We've got that little bit of grey underneath. Not a big problem. Once I finish this first coat, I'm going to come back and pop a second one over top. You'll see I am struggling a little to try and keep everything in shot. If things do get a little blurry today, folks, I apologize in advance. But let's see what we end up with. Now, just as I'm applying the second coat here, I actually switched to one of the dry brushes. This is the large wedge tip dry brush from the Army Painter. I go on about this one all the time, but I have discovered it's actually really good for getting into all of the little nooks and crannies in here. So just a quick heads up. Folks quite often ask what brushes do I use, and it's a question I don't ordinarily answer because it tends not to matter too much. You know, use whatever you've got access to, whatever you're comfortable with. But in this instance, a nice wedge tip has been super useful. So there's that heads up. And there is the Dunkelgelb on our gun. Now, because I'm likely to make a mess applying the base coats to the crew, what I'm going to do is do those now before applying the camo pattern to the gun itself. Otherwise, I'm going to be backing up and doing things 2 or 3 times. So what I'm going to use, this is Feldgrau from the Army Painter again. Now this one I am pretty certain, looking at the product pages and the box art and what have you, that this is what they're swapped to for painting their German releases. However, if you have got older German gear, or if you've got an army that you want to color match, then you could just as easily use Vallejo's Field Grey here. The big difference is that Vallejo's is darker and not quite as green, but I'm sure you've probably seen the old 50 Shades of Field Grey picture out there. So yeah, it is really a matter of personal taste. I'm going to go with this one because I'm not color matching an army. I'm hoping to start a nice looking new one. So the Field Grey here will cover quite nicely. Let's have a look. Oh my goodness, there's a lot of this to do. Now I did find I was quite lucky I didn't actually hit the gun at all, but it's better to be safe than sorry. Now while that is useful for much of the larger areas, if you are struggling to reach anywhere, grab yourself an old brush which has a slightly rounded tip. You can also just take an old brush, trim it down and beat it up a little bit. But what you want is, again, just a random, slightly patchy edge to what you're doing. So you can stipple this on with a brush as well. Now you'll probably see that there's a bit missing in the video, and that's because I was going through the process of making this a little sponge brush and what have you, you actually don't need to. What I found was easier was just using a scraggly old brush. So I applied that first of all, that was camo brown from the historical set, but what I have now is woodland camo. And what I'm going to do is with my scraggly old brush here, just stipple a line down alongside the brown that I've already applied. It can overlap slightly. And yeah, this is going to be much easier than trying to reach into certain areas with a bit of foam. So let me just jiggle that in there. And I'm going to follow all of my little red lines with this. In some areas, like particularly towards the front of the gun here, you'll see there is an open spot. Now, while there isn't a correct way to particularly do this camo, try not to run onto the gun at this stage. If you're like me, you're probably going to end up with a couple of splotches that are a little bigger or thicker than you'd like. So just go back to some of that camo sand from earlier, and with any brush here, you can just lightly stipple at the edges, thin them out a little bit, and if it's slightly blurred, one color doesn't really cover the other perfectly at this stage, all the better. You'll get a nice soft fuzz at the edges of your patterns. So little stippling motions to thin things out. And yeah, let's finish this off. And there really is the crux of doing camo in that way. Apply it thick and then fix it thin. It's going to look a little bit different to if you were doing it with an airbrush, of course, but it saves you having to break out an airbrush if you don't have one set up regularly, or if you just don't have one. What we're going to do now is move on to the infantry, and I'm going to blast through these relatively quickly. We'll start off with their skin, and in the grand tradition of doing this differently almost every single video, I am going to start these guys with ruddy umber. So a little bit of this, and let it dry, and anywhere that you need to apply a second coat, come back and do that afterwards. Now for bread bags and anklets both, what I'm going to use, this is medium drab, and it is from the American paint line. It's quite close to Tundra Taupe, maybe just a little bit lighter and not quite as intensely green. This is more of a khaki sort of color. Now the order in which you do things from this point on isn't going to matter too much, but I am going to start with the helmet covers. And if you're painting Grenadiers from the plastic box set, you're also going to have a few of them that have the rolled socks. So what I have, this is Tomb King Tan. It's very, very similar to German Camo Beige. It is just a touch lighter. If you want one that is almost 1-for-1, you can use Dusty Skull instead. Now why the underside of the base? Valid question. What I'm going to show you here is the little trick that I use for German camo on the Grenadiers. It's not 100% accurate, but it looks right, and it's really easy to do. I'm going to start, I have here some bootstrap brown, and the idea is that we paint little Z sort of lightning bolt shapes, and once you've got that down, fill out little parts of them, and just make random squiggly shapes. So again, if I do a little lightning bolt shape, like so, and then fill that out with a little bit more. The idea is that you want angular bits and pieces. It looks kind of funky, what I'm doing here, but if we start applying this to a helmet, so a little Z shape, and then fill it out. Yeah, let's make a little triangle that way. The sharp edge is what you're looking for. You want geometric, triangular things happening. So a little triangle, and then follow that up with another one like that, and so forth. Let's just fill in some of these helmets. So there is the brown, as closely as I can show you on these guys, just little sharp geometric edges on everything. So upside down again, and what we're going to use for the green is woodland camo again. Now this time, this is much easier. Think Starfleet. So triangular shapes, and then fill them out kind of like the Starfleet Delta. Okay, this, you can just repeat this pattern over and over on the helmets, and you want to overlap some of the brown a little. So let's get them in shot here. So this time you want to overlap some of the brown. And again, this will be much easier without another guy in the way. I'm going to make my little triangle shape and then fill it in. And there we go. Like it. So another one here. And you don't necessarily want to always be applying them in the same direction. So mix things up a little. Turn you guys upside down. And you will find you get a relatively random looking pattern, which is actually very easy to apply. And then finally, any little open bits, you just top a tiny wee slash of green there, and you are golden. Now from a distance there, you'll see the colors are accurate. The shapes aren't 100%, historically accurate, but they look right, especially at a distance on the table. So we'll move on now to some of the other base coats. There's not very many left of these. I have leather brown, and I'm going to use this as the felt cover on the water bottles. Now for small painted items, things that are tin, little metal bits and pieces, I'm going to use dark Feldgrau, and this is a nice, deep, quite strong green, still a little bit olive. I also noticed that I've painted the ammo cases in the wrong color, so I'll have to give them a couple of blasts with this. Any gas mask canisters, stuff like that, this is where you want to paint these in. Now the shells, we're going to give these a couple of coats of greedy gold. Okay, now comes, I hesitate to say it, but this is the long part. What I have is strap grey, and this is going to fill in for a lot of different things. This is black, basically. It is very, very deep grey, bordering black, and when it's shaded, it gives us a more interesting sort of visual look than just black wood. Also, some things aren't black, like helmets, for example. So helmets, straps, boots, black leather, the wheels on the guns, the heads on the shells. There's a lot of this to do. However, luckily, it's all just strap grey. If you want to, you can do the boots in brown, and same too, you could use a dark brown for some of the leather straps, but I'm going to stick to strap grey so that I've got just one colour to do it with. Ooh, that takes some doing. What we're going to finish off with is a little bit of oak brown for the last bits of leather straps, so on helmets, for example. I'll also get a little bit of red and white, and I'll do red on the rounds, the shells that ring around the warhead, and I'll do the white spots on the tips of those as well, and their collar tabs too. Now that's quite a bit of doing. Once you finish with those base coats, I've then come back and I tidied up the uniforms. That was about all that really needed doing. What I'm going to do now is to shade them. Now, it merits a little bit of discussion here because ordinarily what I tend to do is to thin down strong tone with speed paint medium. This time today what I've got is an older mix of strong tone and the wash medium. And it's important to talk about the difference here. The main one is that the speed paint medium flows a little more like water does. So as you're applying it, your wash that you've thinned down is going to go into the recesses quite naturally, and it will tend not to stain flatter areas in quite the same way that neat wash would. With the medium, the wash medium rather, it's a little bit more gloopy, is the easiest way to put it, and it will tend to cling to surfaces rather than run off them in quite the same way as the speed paint medium will. Now the difference here is that it's going to stain everything it touches. It will still run into recesses, as a wash should, but because I've thinned it down, it's not going to stain them quite as much as using neat wash. So, bit of a mouthful there, bit of an explanation, but I wanted to go through it before applying it. But once I'm ready, I've got it all on my little palette here and a nice big brush. Let's apply it here to the fella at the front first. Now it looks almost soupy going on, so take your time as you apply it, and once it's had a couple of seconds to settle, you see this big clump here? I want to shift that with my brush and put it somewhere a little more useful. So this isn't just chuck it on one and done. You do need to apply it, see how it's going to settle, and then shift it. And that's one that's going to get easier with a bit of practice. However, this is going over all of these guys, and it is then going to go over the gun as well. So I got my work cut out for me here. Let's apply this over everything, and then leave it for about half an hour to dry. And with a bit of luck, we'll have something that looks pretty cool. After about half an hour, you'll have something that looks like this. Now, this is a little bit more glossy than you'll see the finish will be from using speed paint medium. The wash medium is the same stuff that's in the wash, and most washes tend to dry a little bit shiny. It's not a huge issue, and here what I'm going to do is actually take it outside and hit it with a matte varnish spray. Now, ordinarily, I would leave that until a final stage. It's not really going to matter all that much if I do it now or later, but it will make it much easier to see what we're doing if I go ahead and pop it on now. So, give me 2 seconds. Now, doesn't that make a world of difference? What we'll do now is a couple of highlights just to add a bit more life to what we've got in front of us, and it's going to start off with some barren dune. Pop just a tiny wee bit of this into a flat brush. Now I'm using the medium dry brush from the Army Painter, same as before, but this time I'm actually going to dry brush with it. And I'm going to start by flicking along the edge, the top of the gun. Just doing that a couple of times. I'll find I'll need a little bit more paint in my brush. But the idea here is that this is going to give us a nice sharp edge to some of the mechanical stuff. And as well, even going over the green and the brown, it's not going to matter too much. It won't look out of place because the primer, the color underneath the actual camo, would have been the yellow or the grey if you're doing an earlier version. So take your time here, just pass over the yellow parts a couple of times, and yeah, let's brighten up the cannon. And then with a little nubbin of packing foam, grab yourself some oak brown, or even a darker brown if you've got it, and what we'll do is just lightly dab at the edges and corners, leading edges where it's going to see a little bit of action. Just pop a bit of oak brown, little random splotches to give it a nice lived-in appearance. Something else you can do with that same bit of foam is to grab yourself some strap grey, dab it around the end of the gun, around the muzzle brake, so you'll very quickly get a black tip to it. But as well, once you've done that, just get the last bits of paint in the little bit of fluff you're carrying, and just drag them back down the length of the barrel a little. And it'll give you a real quick sooty finish there. Now going back to that small dry brush, this is definitely one that's going to take a bit of practice. You want just a tiny, tiny whisper of paint in your brush for this. And I'm going to use light Feldgrau. Now the reason why this is going to work really well is that as well as being able to build up a little bit of a highlight on the back of the jacket and trousers and what have you, you don't have to go overboard, just enough to pick out a little bit of the detail. It will also work if you catch the leather, the black leather. It's just that right tone. It's a bluish green, so it will look fairly natural over black. Now, personally, I quite like how that dry brush works. Now, I know some folks, it is a skill to pick up. My suggestion would be don't go ahead and do it for the very first time on your artillery crew. Do it on your Grenadiers or something. Spend a bit of time getting your eye in for it because it's a very quick method. The light Feldgrau actually takes some of the green out of the uniform, which is really interesting. It goes to a little more blue, faded sort of look. Works just perfectly over the top of that shade mix that we did. Now, for a couple of highlights on the skin, what I'm going to use is agate skin. Now, if you've got the German paint set, this is weathered skin. So you have got this one. Concentrating on bits like backs of knuckles and cheekbones, things like that, how I'd ordinarily paint faces. I would suggest probably watch another video for some tips on that. Once you're satisfied with that, if you want to, you can highlight that a little bit further and Maybe on my officers, I might pop a little dab of Dorado skin, like right on the tip of their nose, but otherwise, what I have is a pencil. Now, any of the belt buckles that I can reach, all I'm going to do is give them a quick buff with the pencil. And same too, you can use the edge of it, if I angle this dude in the right angle. And same too, just buff the edges of a couple of the Stahlhelm, not all the way around, just parts where they look like they've caught a little bit of action. And you can get a very quick, very simple, metallic sort of dinged up finish there at those edges. We'll also work on parts of the gun where you have added chipping. So this is where you can start really having some fun with your weathering if you want to spend a bit more time there. So what I'm going to do now is to go ahead and base it up. The recipe for that is relatively simple. I'm going to pop it in the description. It's just going to take a bit of extra doing because I used the world's biggest base. So let's go ahead. I'll finish that off and we'll get a look at this Pack 40 once it's finished. And so there at last, our plastic anti-tank cannon is complete. And I really had a blast painting it. I do think I would go back and paint the crew separately in the future if I'm going to do another one. And I certainly am, because despite Warlord having very kindly sent me along this kit for free, as soon as I'd assembled it, I went and I pre-ordered a new, one of the new Grenadier boxes, army boxes, because they're just that good. The heavy weapons are fantastic as well. I'm looking forward to painting some of them too. Now, I did say that the base instructions, they're in the description, but after popping a couple of pictures of this up on Blue Sky, folks are really interested in seeing how I actually did the base. So while it is quite simple, I'm going to do just a real quick video where I do like a mortar team, and I'll base that on camera so that you can see how I've got that clump stuff to be a little bit more puffy. So thanks again goes to Warlord for, like I said, letting me have one of these. It has not cost them anything in the end, if we're perfectly honest. And I don't think I was exaggerating to say that these are really going to change how the game is played, because I know so many people turn their nose up at anti-tank guns or mortars, machine guns, because they're metal miniatures. So I'm looking forward to seeing what comes out next in plastic. I've got my fingers crossed that it's going to be some Vickers teams, but who knows? You know, I don't get any sort of sneaky peeks beforehand, so I've got my fingers crossed, same as everybody, for my favorite armies. Thanks as well goes to Exit 23 Games, of course, for the light and sound equipment, as well as all of my wonderful patrons who are keeping me ticking in paints and glue, which includes my gorgeous producers who are showing up on screen now. Thank you very much for your support, folks. I mean it every time. I say it every time. It is always true. So any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comment box below. My Blue Sky and Instagram are both linked there too. So thank you very much for your time, one and all, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.